I never gave them much thought, skinwalkers, Wendigo spirits, just stories. Then I moved to the reservation. I was assigned to work as a park ranger in a remote stretch of land near the Navajo Nation, a place where the mountains are jagged and the land feels as ancient as time itself. It was my first real job in the field after training, and I thought I could handle whatever nature could throw at me. But I was wrong. It all started the way these things usually do, with a quiet warning. I was in the ranger station when I first met Tom, an old Navajo man who lived near the edge of the reservation. He was the type of person who spoke rarely, but when he did, everyone listened. I'd seen him around, his weathered face always serious, eyes sharp, like he saw things no one else did. He never offered a greeting, just a nod. One afternoon, he came into the station, looked at me with those piercing eyes, and said something that still chills me to my core. "They worse than skinwalkers, Ranger." At first, I thought he was talking about some new threat to the wildlife, perhaps a predator spotted near the park, but there was a weight in his voice, something that made me pause. He had always seemed so calm, yet now he was on edge, visibly uncomfortable. "You talking about a pack of wolves, or something else?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. Tom didn't answer me right away. Instead, he stared out the window, his brow furrowing as though he were thinking of something long buried. Then he spoke again. "You need to be careful out there. The land is ancient, and there are things in those woods, things older than the people who walk here now, things worse than skinwalkers." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Those things can wear the skin of animals, but what I'm talking about, they wear the skin of us." I thought the old man was losing his mind. I laughed it off to myself, deciding it was just one of those superstitions passed down through generations. But something about the way he said it unsettled me. There was a warning in his voice I couldn't ignore. A week later, I'd wish I had. The park I patrolled was far from any city, surrounded by thick forests and steep cliffs. The locals rarely visited unless they had business on the reservation, which made it a peaceful, isolated place, just how I liked it. But one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest began to settle into darkness, I found myself drawn deeper into the woods than I intended. I was on a routine patrol, checking for illegal hunting traps, when I stumbled upon something strange. The forest had fallen unnervingly silent. The usual hum of insects and chirping of birds had vanished. In its place, there was a heavy, suffocating stillness. My flashlight flickered as I walked, casting long shadows across the trees. Then I saw it. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, a figure, tall and hunched, moving through the trees with unnerving speed. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. But the shape was wrong. Too long, too thin, too unnatural. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck rising. I wasn't sure why, but I knew, deep down, that whatever I was seeing wasn't a creature of this world. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. Something about the figure, its movement, its stillness, made me want to stay quiet, as if by speaking I would draw its attention. I turned and started walking back, slowly, trying to keep my footsteps light, my breath shallow. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, stalked from just beyond the trees. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The image of the creature haunted me, its dark, glimmering eyes, its hollow, human, like limbs. I had seen things in the wild, but this felt different. The weight of Tom's warning, the way he'd spoken of things that wore human skin, gnawed at me like a persistent itch. The next day, I went to Tom, hoping for answers. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, but something had happened that I couldn't explain. When I found him, he was sitting on his porch, staring out at the vast, empty land. His face was grave. I sat down beside him without saying a word. He knew why I was there. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low and calm. I nodded. "The one you saw last night," he said, his eyes not leaving the horizon. "That wasn't a skinwalker. That was worse. Much worse." I swallowed. "What are they, then?" "They are the ones who were here before us. They are the ones who have always been here. Skinwalkers are just a story. They are a small thing compared to what lies in the heart of these woods. These creatures, these things, they are not flesh and bone. They're older than any curse. They were the ones who made the land what it is, and they've never left." He paused, glancing at me, his eyes narrowing. "They wear the skin of humans, not animals. And they can walk like us, talk like us. They can even be us, if they want. You'll never know who's one of them until it's too late." That night, I went back to the woods. I wasn't sure why, but something inside me told me I had to. I had to see the truth. I wasn't going to find answers if I stayed in the ranger station, hiding behind my reports and patrols. The forest was darker than I remembered. The air felt thicker, the shadows deeper. And then I saw it again. The same figure moving between the trees. Only this time, I wasn't alone. I could hear it whispering, words in a language I couldn't understand, but somehow I felt it in my bones. It wasn't just calling to me. It was calling to the earth itself. I stepped forward, the ground beneath me shifting unnaturally, pulling me deeper into the forest. I wanted to scream, but my throat constricted. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. The thing in the woods wasn't a skinwalker. It was something far older, and now that it had seen me, I knew it would never let me leave. When I woke up, I was back at the ranger station. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land. I had no memory of how I'd gotten there or how long I'd been gone. But I knew one thing for certain: Tom was right. They are worse than skinwalkers, and they are waiting. If you hear their whispers, if you see their shadows flicker at the corner of your eye, don't follow. Even look. Because once they know you're listening, once they know you see them, you're already lost. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth was becoming undeniable. I tried to convince myself that it was all just exhaustion, a trick of the mind brought on by too many nights alone in the woods. But deep down, I knew better. I tried to return to some sense of normalcy, continuing my patrols and paperwork. But the unease gnawed at me like a constant itch I couldn't scratch. I couldn't stop thinking about that night, about the way the creature moved, about the whispers that filled the air like a distant chant. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the rustling in the trees, the unsettling silence that had swallowed everything in its way. Then it happened again. This time, I wasn't alone. I had invited one of the newer rangers, Sarah, to join me for a night patrol. She was bright, eager, and hadn't been jaded by the long hours in the field like I had. I figured a fresh pair of eyes would keep me from spiraling, keep me grounded. As we hiked deeper into the forest, the familiar tension settled over me, the air growing thick with something unaimable. Sarah didn't seem to notice, happily chatting away about her training and the wildlife we'd been monitoring. I was barely listening, my eyes scanning the woods for something, anything, that might confirm what I already knew. When we saw it at first, it was just a flicker, a shadow darting between the trees. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I turned to Sarah. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice suddenly low. She paused, looking around. "What? The deer?" I shook my head. "No, something else. Something bigger." I started moving toward the trees, instinctively drawn to the spot where I'd seen the movement. Sarah followed hesitantly, sensing my change in demeanor. As we moved deeper, I felt it again, the oppressive stillness that always seemed to precede them. I could feel their eyes, just out of sight, watching us, waiting. And I knew that whatever it wasn't just a creature. It was something that knew we were there. Something that had been waiting for us to wander too far. And then the whispers came. It wasn't a sound I could hear directly, but I could feel it in the air, like an electric charge skimming my skin. It was soft at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. But then it grew louder, sharper. It wasn't words. I couldn't make out anything distinct, but it was a voice, a collective voice, resonating from the forest itself. "Get out," it seemed to say. My legs froze. "Get out." The voice repeated, louder now, clearer. It was coming from everywhere, from above, below. The very ground beneath us seemed to pulse with it. Sarah, visibly shaken, started backing away. "Nate, what the hell is that?" she whispered, her breath coming in quick. Sharp gasps. "Move," I hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the path. My eyes darted around the woods, scanning for movement. But the shadows were gone. The silence had returned, suffocating and heavy. But it wasn't over. We hadn't made it 10 feet before I saw it, a figure standing between the trees, just off the trail. It was tall, too tall, impossibly tall, and it was just standing there, motionless, watching us. I couldn't make out any distinct features, only a shape, dark and distorted, shifting unnaturally in the pale moonlight. "Run," I shouted before I even realized the words were out of my mouth. I grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her harder, faster, but every step I took felt like the ground was sinking beneath me. The trees seemed to close in, the path twisting, turning in directions that didn't make sense. We were lost. I knew it, even as the trees seemed to move around us. I could feel the weight of the thing behind us, just beyond the edge of my sight, drawing closer. The whispers were getting louder now, accompanied by a low growl, like something was shifting in the depths of the woods, something massive, ancient, and angry. We finally stumbled back onto the main trail, but it wasn't the same trail we had taken. The trees were different now, tighter, denser, darker. The forest felt alive. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was watching us. Every footstep echoed too loudly. Every breath felt too shallow. I felt like I was suffocating, like the forest itself was closing in, wrapping its fingers around my throat. "Don't look back," I whispered. But it was too late. We both turned, and there it was, the figure from before, standing in the shadows between the trees. No longer just watching, it was moving now, gliding forward, its form shifting in unnatural angles, its limbs too long, too thin, like the branches of a tree twisting in the wind. But this thing didn't belong in the forest. It wasn't part of the land. It was the land, and it was coming for us. I don't remember how we made it back to the station. My mind was a blur. Everything happening too fast and too slow, all at once. I remember Sarah's terrified face, her hands trembling as she clutched my jacket, but nothing else. When we got back, we found ourselves alone. The station was eerily quiet, as if it had been waiting for us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring out at the darkened woods, knowing that I would never be able to escape the memories of what I had seen, what I had felt. And that's when I heard it again, the whispers, just outside the window. They were softer now, almost seductive, but I knew better. The things in the woods weren't interested in conversation. They had no interest in peace. They were only interested in one thing, Gust. And I was certain, deep in my bones, that the forest would never let us leave, not unless it had already taken everything from us first. I don't know what happens next. I'm telling you this now because I don't have much time left. The forest is always watching, always waiting. I can feel it creeping closer, pushing in from the edges of my world. But I know one thing for sure: once it has you, you don't leave. Not really. So if you ever find yourself near the edge of a forest, and you hear something rustling in the trees, or if you feel the ground shift beneath your feet, remember this: there are things in the woods, and they are not skinwalkers. They are much, much worse. As the days passed, I began to lose track of time. The whispers became more frequent, more insistent, until they weren't just confined to the trees. It felt like they were inside my head, inside my very bones, crawling under my skin, making my thoughts disjointed. I started to forget what was real and what wasn't. I told myself I was going crazy. I had to be. This couldn't be real, not in any rational sense. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had seen it. I had felt it. The creatures in the woods, those shadowy, ancient things, they were real. They were as old as the land itself, and they were getting closer. The station, once a place of comfort, had become a prison. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside, every rustling branch, each one seemed to be them, waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to break. And then the night came. The night had been draining. I had just finished my patrol, walking back to the station, when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. They echoed in the empty night air. My heart began to race. I turned around. Nothing, but I could feel it. The thing. It was there in the shadows, just out of sight, watching, waiting. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran. The woods were alive, shifting with every step I took. The trees seemed to close in, narrowing the path, bending unnaturally toward me, as if they were reaching for me. I stumbled through the underbrush, tripping over roots and rocks, but I couldn't stop. I reached the clearing, the spot where I'd seen it before, the creature, the figure that wasn't supposed to exist. I could feel it watching me again, its presence suffocating, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final moment. I looked up, and there it was. The shadow stretched impossibly tall against the backdrop of the moonlit sky, its limbs twisted and cracked like old wood. Its eyes, dark, infinite, were fixed on me, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of recognition, and then it spoke. "We were here before you." The words weren't in any language I knew, but I understood them, felt them deep inside, like a memory long forgotten. Suddenly the earth beneath my feet began to give way. The ground was no longer solid. It was soft, like wet clay, shifting beneath my weight. I reached out to grab a tree for support, but the bark crumbled in my hands, and the tree fell backward, disappearing into the darkness. I was sinking. Panic clawed at my chest as I tried to pull myself free. But the more I struggled, the faster the ground seemed to pull me in. And I realized then, the forest wasn't just alive. It was a living thing, a vast, hungry entity that consumed everything in its path. I heard the whispering again, louder now, almost deafening. It was all around me, inside me. You could never leave. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the forest as I was pulled under. When they found me, hours later, I was still alive. But I wasn't the same. The forest had changed me. The land had marked me with its presence, filled me with its endless hunger. My body was intact, but my mind was elsewhere. I had seen things, felt things, things I can never unsee. The woods had taken something from me, something I could never get back,